Chris.
Let's see. Okay, it looks like our recording has started, and I will call the December 2023 meeting, the last one for the year, of the Information Technology Advisory Commission, or the Tech Commission, is called to order. Do we have any public comment? Rick Burke, yes? Hello, Rick? Oh, just wait. Okay, you're with us. Louise or Kevin, do you have anything?
I do not. I have one.
Okay. All right.
Nor do I.
All right. And Joe Ross, are you?
I don't have anything to say. I'm going
Okay.
to give a presentation a little later.
Okay. All right. Very good. That, I guess, will bring us, since there's no public comment, bring us to the chair's update and brings us to meeting minutes. Do we have any volunteers to take our minutes?
I'll do it.
All right.
Just Prescott.
Okay,
Thanks,
Prescott.
Prescott.
Okay, well, appreciate you stepping up again, and we'll have to encourage additional participation for
Right,
the new year, but we'll accept your kind offer there. Is Gary on? I don't see it. Is Gary on? Richard, is Gary on? I don't see it. Oh,
See, I'm looking down I do not see Gary Thayer.
okay, because he had volunteered to do the November minutes and had not yet circulated them that I saw anyhow. So we will postpone consideration on those until the next, our next meeting, January meeting. Is Miranda on? I don't see her either.
No, I think, Frank, we might want to give it a minute.
Okay.
Until Andrea.
Still early, yeah, we're a couple minutes
back,
in, so yeah, we'll get
back down. I don't think we actually had a quorum, so.
All right.
Now we do.
All right.
Laura's
Hello,
here, so we're good.
everyone.
Hello.
Now we've got 7. All right, good.
All right.
There's Mike.
Okay, yeah, I see Mike coming on. We had circulated the PPP letter. Had anybody provided any comments, input to Miranda on that? That's why I was asking for Miranda on that.
There's Miranda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Miranda, did you get any additional comments or input on the letter that you drafted for the performance parking pilot since the last meeting?
No additional.
Okay. Frank, I'd move that we move to a vote to just to adopt it as it was written.
Written with your edits, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a second? All right. See. Okay, Jim. All right. All in favor of adopting Miranda's letter as edited, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Jackie's got her hand up. Was that
all right? Yes? Good. Do we have any nays? No. Any abstentions? Looks like it carries unanimously. So got that. We had earlier circulated the proposed unmanned aircraft systems policies. And I know Rhea had expressed some concerns about the privacy. My recollection was we were waiting on something additional on that. Is that correct, John? Yeah,
I think we requested a briefing on it. I mean, the request for input kind of came out. We haven't had a chance to really had a briefing on it or discuss it as a commission. So
okay, yeah, I think that's probably the best would be before we comment to actually get briefed on. I mean, we had the opportunity to review the paperwork, but I think it'd probably be better if we request. So we'll ask Richard and or Norrin to invite the appropriate officials to brief us on that in the new year. All right, let's see. We've got one application that applicant that John and I spoke with for the commission, and board liaison will reach out to him, and then would expect to have a new member for the new year. And the book club, John circulated the 5 choices that that we received from the library. They look good, and I think when I checked before the meeting that 4 people had weighed in on a ranked choice there. So please provide additional input. Take a look at it. It looks like some good choices. So that's something we're going to, in coordination with the library, try to set up also for the new year. I think that's all I've got at this point. So that brings us to item number 4, the Phase 2 broadband study update with Holly Hartel, Assistant CIO for Strategic Initiatives at DTS, Jennifer Scow, Strategic Projects Planner, Research and Strategic Initiatives Group at DC PhD. Holly, hand it to you.
So I am going to kick it off, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who will then turn it over to our consultants. Just a quick thank you. So as Frank was saying, I'm Holly Hartel. I work for DTS, and some of you who've seen me for a while, I work on a lot of these projects that are, the strategic in nature, priority to the CIO, and considerate of how we're thinking about what we're doing with our assets and resources in the county. So thank you for coming along with us in this journey. It's been a long one. Before we move forward, just want to remind you, the last time we were before you was in June. And we talked about the needs assessment. The needs assessment report and summary is available on the broadband website, as is this report of where we are right now. So Jennifer Scow, our partner and the project manager for CPHD, she's leading this effort, and she had shared the findings from the needs assessment. What was great about the needs assessment, it was the first opportunity for us to have a holistic data-based view of broadband in the county, utilizing the e-checkup survey with over 700 responses, ACS data, interviews of over 70 stakeholders, newly released FCC data, which we'd never had access to that before, comparing that to our MHUD database and other sources, kind of allowed us to understand the needs in Arlington at a level that we didn't before. And so you'll hear both Jennifer, and then when the consultant gets into it, kind of that's the basis for this model evaluation. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to us. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who'll do a quick introduction herself.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you all for giving us space to share this next phase of our work. Just wanted to also mention that this study is a 3-phase process. So Holly spoke to the needs assessment. The purpose of this meeting is all about this comparative model evaluation. And then the 3rd and final phase is all about recommendations and what we should do with all this information. So this second component, comparative model evaluation, it looks at various infrastructure, household subsidy interventions to address our gaps. 4 different high-level options were analyzed on a scale of varying county involvement. And all the options, they've had some level of interest over the last few years. And so we wanted to, given that they're all pretty different with different outcomes, we just wanted to understand that a bit better and use this process to better understand how well and in what situations each of those options meets the county needs. So the report that we shared with you and that we'll speak to tonight, it's thorough, it's thoughtful, and it gives us an objective view of the various costs, implementation consideration, the risks, all so that we can focus our policies and our interventions on activities that's going to provide the greatest benefit and that's going to best address our needs. It also gives us an understanding of why others may not make sense for our community right now. So our consultant team, Televate and Strategic Networks Group, they're both here to present their analysis and findings. And so at this time, I'll invite Joe Ross to present. He's a senior partner for Televate, and he's given us a wealth of knowledge about our marketplace, broadband technology and economics, and also practical solutions. So the floor is yours, Joe.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, and thanks to the committee for having us. So I will be doing most of the speaking, but I do have Andy Bates from SNG and Rick Burke from Televate that are going to support me with questions. So to start things off, I mean, I think Jennifer and Holly.
Joe, sorry to interrupt. I just want to state for the record that Rick and I have no relation whatsoever. So just same last name.
Okay. That's important. So I think Holly and Jennifer did a great job of kicking this off and talking about the goals and objectives of the program. And you know, we finished the resource evaluation needs assessment phase earlier this year. We just wrapped up the comparative internet service model evaluation that Jennifer talked about it with great accuracy and detail. And then following this, we have a strategic recommendations where we'll detail our recommendations to ensure reliable, affordable broadband for Arlington's needs and to further the county's digital equity goals. So first, it's important to understand the problem and the variety of problems that were identified in the needs assessment. So the core problems that were identified that these models address are lack of infrastructure quality. So did the location have the 100 down, 100 up data speeds? We also found that there was some lack of competition in the market, not a whole lot, but there were quite a bit more locations where we saw that there was only one provider that was offering that high level of service. And one of the things that we addressed in this report was we noted that Comcast was upgrading their infrastructure, and that previously they had been reporting that they were offering something less than 100 megabits up, and I believe now they're reporting that they are offering over 100 megabits up, and we anticipated that, and so we considered a lack of competition above 100 to include Comcast. And then the final problem that we're addressing with this model evaluation is the lack of affordability. And lack of affordability is defined in the needs assessment as those households that have where the cost of broadband exceeds 1.5% of their income. And so that's a total of 21,000, roughly 500 households, but there are some other models that were performed that scale that back based upon some different assumptions. So in the we have 3 infrastructure models that were evaluated and 1 financial subsidy model to address the affordability segment. As you may know, in order for the county to provide service, you would need to establish a wireless service authority. Now, the name is really a misnomer. It doesn't have to be wireless. But in this particular scenario, we assume that it would be fiber to the premises, and we would leverage, where possible, Connect Arlington. And in this particular model, we assume that the authority would deliver the service, operate the network, but outsource where it made sense, outsource certain services as where it made sense. We have a third-party operator model, which takes really one step back from the wireless service authority. So the county would not be involved in providing service. Instead, it would be a model where the county would deliver dark fiber as close to the premises as possible. So, mostly to the handholds in front of the property. And then the third party would provide retail service and would do the final drop. The third infrastructure base model was an ISP model, one where a third party expands service into the underserved areas under an agreement with the county. So maybe it's something like the cable franchise agreement. So regarding the financial subsidies model, we we evaluated a variable financial subsidy. So depending upon the need for a particular household, where they were in relation to 1.5% of their income and where the service costs, versus where the service costs are. And so it was a subsidy that would be applied, whatever that delta is, the household would be subsidized. We also included several options. So there's an affordable connectivity program that's ongoing right now, and we considered models with and without that. And then we looked at whether or not we would be subsidizing a 100/100 service or a 100/20 service, which is the guideline for underserved by the federal government. So I'm not going to go over all the strengths and weaknesses, but essentially the Wireless Service Authority and the third-party operator, the weaknesses were primarily financial, right? So we saw that this model, these infrastructure models that build infrastructure to serve all three of those categories were losing substantial money over the 25 years, and it would cost the county a whole lot more money to solve these individual problems. We saw that they had extensive construction cost risks. They had, especially the Wireless Service Authority, had substantial revenue risk. So, there's a variety of, there's competition in the marketplace, and the competitors have the resources to compete on price if necessary, so they can offer discounts. Then there's other factors like bulk agreements, things of that nature that would erode the ability for a county-led wireless service authority to generate revenue. And so there'd be substantial risk associated with that. Now, the benefit to the Wireless Service Authority is that there'd be full control over the infrastructure and the service. So wherever you want to provide service, whatever kind of service you wanted to offer, whatever subsidies you would want to offer to individual households, there is full control over that. Third-party operator would have full control over the infrastructure as well. Another third-party operator risk would be that you'd have to find a retail provider. Now, that's probably not a very high risk. There might be a number of parties that would want that if the county took the bulk of the risk with the fiber to the presence infrastructure, that would be taking away a lot of the service provider's risks. And so that might be a lighter risk. Now, with the ISP model, the issue is that the county, due to federal regulations, would have limited control over the ISP. So forcing the ISP to serve all of these locations, including and especially the affordable locations where, since they're outside of this, they're not unserved and they don't lack competition. It means that they're already competitive. And so, it would be much more difficult to get the ISPs to participate in that kind of a marketplace. Now, the benefit of that model is that clearly the financial risk to the county would be far lower, right? So if the ISP was willing to make the investment to serve all these locations, then the county's risk would be lower. On the financial subsidy model, the benefits is that, clearly that you would be subsidizing households to be able to have service when they were having trouble affording the service. And another benefit to this particular model is that the subsidy would be applied only to the extent that it was needed, right? So only to the extent that that household is cost burdened. But the weaknesses are that it's an expensive program. It's going to cost the county substantial sums of money, and a variable subsidy would be complex to implement. So I'm just going to not go over the grades for each of these models and for each of the categories of the problem that they're trying to solve. But I just want to highlight that there's a number of factors that were included in our rating. So the overall cost, the risks, and then the likelihood that would address the need. So the first category that I'm going to talk about is the lack of affordability. And you'll notice that we assigned Fs to the WSA, the Wireless Service Authority, the third-party operator, and the ISP models because they don't really solve the problem. So these models were just providing service to those locations. They weren't providing affordable service, and there would have to be additional investments in order to make that affordability. Now, the subsidy model does a good job and is really, created to address affordability directly. That was applied to B because there are still some challenges associated with this particular model, and there's some other challenges that are not really related to affordability that the county is going to need to tackle as well. So, such as digital literacy, language barriers, and then ultimately outreach to eligible households is going to be an important factor. So with regards to the lack of choice and competition and the lack of infrastructure quality, because of the tremendous cost to the county, we saw that the Wireless Service Authority and the third-party operator models would get passing grades, but would be very undesirable, D- and D respectively. And we saw that the ISP model would be acceptable and is more likely to be successful. But because of the challenges, because of it's a very competitive market, the Arlington market, and because of that, we don't see the likelihood that a new ISP would enter the market and service these particular locations. So we see that with regards to the lack of choice and competition. Those are certainly options. So those are an opportunity for a new ISP, but because of the other level of competition, I mean, one of the factors that wasn't included in whether or not there's competition was a provider like T-Mobile. So I think you all know that T-Mobile is very aggressive, and they have a 100/20 service in a lot of the county, and because they didn't achieve the 100/100 service threshold, that those locations were not considered competitive. So the county would have limited control over these ISPs that would come in. And so if the county did try to require that a new ISP would come in and serve these locations, there would be some risk that you wouldn't be able to find an ISP to enter the market. But again, it was still acceptable, just that the lack of control and ability to make sure that they serve all non-competitive and lack of infrastructure quality locations would be a risk. And of course, the subsidy program didn't address the lack of competition and the lack of infrastructure quality. So this slide provides more details about the financial analysis. So it was a very high order of magnitude, rough order magnitude analysis. And the Wireless Service Authority, you can see over the 25 years of the life of fiber, would lose about $60 million. The third-party operator model would lose $17 million, as opposed to the ISP model, which would actually gain $117 million in net revenue over the 25 years. Now, towards the tail end of this 25 years, the Wireless Service Authority and third-party operator models do make money. They are making some money, but they haven't come close to recovering all the investments that were made at the beginning part of the program. On the ISP side, we also have the ISP's perspective. So That's the third column in this analysis. And then the final column is an Arlington perspective. And so, we included in the analysis that there would need to be an additional person that would be responsible for managing whatever new mechanism was created in order to bring in this new ISP. And there would be limited inflow of funds. I think we assumed that there would be a 5% of revenue, but certainly the competitive revenue would just be moving money from one vendor to another. And so if it's 5% of gross revenues on on broadband services or the equivalent, then it wouldn't generate a whole lot of money. So at the end of the day, we saw that the wireless service authority, the third-party operator models were not sustainable. And in terms of the ISP model, it was sustainable for the ISP, but it was going to cost Arlington some funds in order to have the resources to manage an additional ISP. So on the subsidy cost analysis, as I mentioned earlier, we have basically 4 different scenarios. We have whether or not we're comparing against a 100/100 megabit or better plan, or whether it's a 100/20. So the nomenclature there is downlink, uplink. So 100 up, 100 down, 100 down, and 20 up. And then whether or not there's a participating federal subsidy to go along with it. Specifically, we looked at the Affordable Connectivity Program. And so what you'll see here is that the number of individuals that are in each scenario is modified based upon that. So if you look at the second row, for example, that's the highest, that's roughly 21,500 households that would be involved in that. And the first row is basically reduced because you have the remaining homes are on the Affordable Connectivity Program. You can see that the magnitude of cost for this on an annual basis would be extremely high. So if the ACP program had disappeared, subsidizing the 100 by 100 plans would cost $9 million a year in subsidies. Now, when we take away the subsidy, when we take away those households that are already supported by the Affordable Connectivity Program, that drops to $3.9 million a year. Now, because the 100/20 speed tiers are cheaper, then there's fewer that actually would be eligible for this. So because it's cheaper, some households can afford that service tier level. And so there you were, roughly half or so the number of households, and so that cost would go down substantially. So we're splitting the additional considerations in 2 parts. One is the initial considerations. So here, in terms of the considerations for implementing some of these county-funded systems. So certainly the ISP model would have different factors, but in terms of the wireless service authority and the third-party model, these are additional considerations that you would have to encounter in order to implement the infrastructure program. So, one of the things that would need to happen is that you would need to evaluate the risks and benefits in this model evaluation. You might entertain preliminary efforts to create a wireless service authority, so it is a third-party entity, and approve a project for one particular model. One of the challenges of including the cost burden households is you don't necessarily know where they are. You certainly could identify the affordable housing locations, but that's not the entire cost burden marketplace. So you'd have to figure out how you're going to build infrastructure to these additional cost burden households. Of course, you'd need to do detailed engineering and budgeting. In terms of the third-party operator model, you'd want to do research and find out if there was interest in a retail provider providing service. You'd want to do research about the other third parties and the costs associated with those services in order to fully understand and mitigate all the risk for construction. And then finally, you'd want to do detailed market research in order to reduce your revenue risk. So maybe there are parts of the county that you wouldn't invest in because they're very unlikely to subscribe to a county-based service. So, for example, might be a building with bulk agreements with an existing provider where they would never, the residents would be very unlikely to subscribe to your service. Those kinds of things that you'd want to find out early and upfront before making a major investment. So in terms of the subsidy model, so certainly evaluating the risks presented in the model evaluation report, the county would need to make decisions regarding the population scale, what speed targets there are that the county wants to address. In my opinion, many households could probably suffice with a lot less service speed. So, for example, the Comcast Internet Essentials program is, I think it's 50 down and 10 up. And for many households, that might be more than adequate. And in terms of planning and development, the county would need to hire administrative staff to oversee the subsidy program. And one of the important elements would be creating eligibility verification systems. So how is it that these individuals are going to be verified to, as to whether or not what their income levels are and whether or not they qualify for the program at all. Then in terms of the implementation considerations, so once you've gone through those initial steps, on the infrastructure side, what we would see with the staffing, again, some of the positions would be outsourced, but for the Wireless Service Authority, we saw it initially having a staff of 15 and a steady state of 13. For the third party, certainly during the construction phase, there would be a lot more individuals that would be needed in order to complete the construction. But for the ongoing steady state, we saw that there would only need to be one individual who is responsible for the operations of the dark fiber. In terms of the ISP model, the ISP would staff that. We would presume that if it was an existing ISP operating in the county, that they could probably absorb these locations. But if it was a new ISP, they might need to bring on more staff to cover the Arlington territory. And we assumed one county FTE to manage this new ISP relationship. Certainly phasing, so where, maybe starting with a neighborhood where you felt that the returns would be better, where the uptake would be better. And certainly an important consideration on the infrastructure would be the financing and sustainability. So, if the county were to proceed with a wireless service authority or a third party operations, in addition to this, all the funding that we estimated to be needed, just to really cover the first 5 years, that the loans that we established were really just covering the first 5 years, but clearly because they're losing a substantial sum of money, that would also need to be funded. And is that funded under debt? And if that debt, you're going to have to take on more debt than those losses in order to have a fully sustainable service. On the financial subsidy, certainly staffing, admin, it could involve multiple departments, policy, program management, financial oversight. The stakeholder partnerships could possibly support the subsidy program and reduce the burden on county admin and financial systems. One of the important elements would be to evaluate the potential grant program funding. So there are digital equity grants. There's outreach grants for the ACP program that had been implemented, but there might be some grant opportunities. And then certainly sustainability. So, if the ACP program is not funded further, then the county might have to step up more in order to make up for that loss in the ACP program, as an example. So wrapping it up, next steps is the strategic recommendations. We're going to deliver those this winter, this coming winter. It's informed by the needs assessment and the model evaluation. We're going to include both broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion recommendations, as well as 3 case studies that cover infrastructure and digital inclusion. We'll address timeframes, staffing, partnerships, funding, as well. And then, ultimately, these recommendations are going to guide our recommendations to deliver reliable, high-speed, affordable broadband services and to further the county's digital equity goals with digital inclusion programs. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to questions if there are any.
Are there any questions?
I've definitely got some, Frank, but I wanted to let
All right.
The other commissioners take a crack if they have
Sure.
some. So I'll jump in. The financial model, you repeatedly made reference to this as I think the phrase you used was a rough order of magnitude assessment. Could you help us understand the model a little bit more in detail and kind of what the limitations of it are and kind of the granularity that you were able to achieve with your analysis? Because I think that helps us understand a little bit better.
Yeah, so there's the infrastructure portion, and then I'll turn it over to Andy to talk about the subsidy model. Or were you interested in just one of the two?
I'm interested in the overall model for the analysis. Like, at what level of granularity are you comparing the different options? What data are you using to assess costs? Because none of that data is in the report. And so it's kind of hard for someone reading the report to understand the detailed financials comparison between these.
So on the infrastructure side, we had different assumptions regarding the take rates for each of these different categories. So for example, the take rate was higher where it was an unserved or underserved location. The take rate was much lower where there was already a competitive scenario, and that would be the affordable housing locations. And the take rate for the non-competitive locations was somewhere between those two. So in terms of revenue, we assumed I'm forgetting exactly, but so roughly the average revenue per unit that exists in the country. So I think it was $67 service revenue and an additional $10 modem revenue. In terms of the costs, so we used we used an assumption about the cost per passing. So the cost per passing is what does it take to get infrastructure, so fiber infrastructure, to deliver to all these locations. And we used well-known metrics that that are used for some of these high-level calculations. We didn't do a specific design. It would have been impossible to do so for the cost burden locations. because we didn't know where they were. And so, basically it's X $1,000 per past household, past business, that was used on the construction side. And then on the other, from the operations cost perspective, we, made assumptions about what staff salaries would be and benefits and things of that nature, and using our knowledge of the marketplace, what companies would charge for the services that we had intended to outsource. Do you have any specific questions about?
So just make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because I've got the report up, which is the nice thing about doing this virtually. I'm looking at table 10, infrastructure model revenue assumptions, and you've got the total number of units for the underserved infrastructure, cost burden, and non-competitive as the passing. So it's like 159 units for infrastructure underserved, 21,495 for cost burden, and 4,858 for non-competitive. Were those the only revenues, the customers that you were assuming were getting revenue in this model, or were there is there revenue sources from other customers that don't fall into these categories?
So it was just these categories. I mean, certainly if it's a new ISP and they pass other locations that look, enticing in term, meaning that there could be some return on investment, it's certainly that they could serve more locations for sure. But because we have no way of knowing that, that wasn't introduced into the model.
So there's like no revenue assumptions for like Arlington County government or Arlington County public schools using the Wireless Services Authority?
No, those, we assume that they're already served with their own infrastructure.
Okay. Mike, you got your hand up. I'll yield the floor to you.
Thank you, John. John likes to go granular and I like to go global. So to pull back, you said 21,000 households need supplemental or entire service, and that's about a fifth, if my arithmetic is right. About a fifth of the Arlington County households need help with one of these programs. Is that correct? We have about 110,000 households.
It sounds accurate, yes.
Okay, so what are the comparable jurisdictions in the DMV doing on this? What is Loudoun? What is Montgomery County? What is the city of Alexandria? Where are we in terms of addressing this problem compared to other jurisdictions?
I mean, Andy, do you want to take that, or Jennifer? It sounds like you want to take that.
I can take it, Andy. You can go first, and I can kind of follow up if you'd like.
Okay, sure, that's fine. As far as the financial subsidy model goes for the addressing affordability, which speaks to those 20.
I can't hear very well.
Oh, sorry, is that better?
No.
No.
It seems like your mic's off and your laptop or your computer mic is picking up background.
Sorry, I'm afraid this would happen.
You want to go first, Jennifer? And
yeah, let me go first. I'll tackle your question about the jurisdictions and how we stack up. So Holly and I actually participate in a Northern Virginia sort of like regional group of staff who are kind of working on digital equity for our respective jurisdictions. And you can kind of back me up, but my sense is that we're ahead of the game in the way that we're looking at this. And I would say that probably in terms of promoting the ACP program and getting people signed up, maybe not so much there. I think other jurisdictions are potentially doing a bit better job of getting the word out about that subsidy and getting people signed up. We could do a better job. And I think that we will, particularly after this report is released. So, but in terms of looking at it from like an affordability standpoint and kind of globally, no one else is looking at it in the way that we're looking at it. They're all sort of stopping at ACP. And in Northern Virginia, the ACP basically helps at about 30% of the area median income. When you look at the income requirements and eligibility standards of that program and compare that to our own household income. So that's where most people are stopping. We're trying to define, well, what does it mean to have affordable internet? And there's no real standard like we do in housing. I don't know if you've ever heard of the housing standard, where you can't spend more than 30% of your income towards housing or else you're considered cost burdened. So there's no real standard for internet service, but there are some national organizations looking at this. Some are using 1%, some are using 2%. And so Strategic Networks Group, who kind of managed that part of this report, they took the average of that 1.5% and applied that to our household income. And where that falls is about 50% of the area median income. So that's what you're looking at. Around that is about our like internet service cost burden. And so, but the thing is when you look at the numbers, it's, when you're at the higher tiers of like 40%, 50% area median income, you're looking at like a $5 sort of cost differential. And so it's not a huge amount. And I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to sort of be thorough here and say that we are doing more to look at this issue and address this than the other surrounding jurisdictions.
Thank you.
I would definitely agree with that. That there's, Arlington is unique in that it really thought about affordability a whole lot in more detail. So everybody stops at ACP and assumes that it's only those that are eligible for ACP that are affected. But the reality is that the households that are having, that are likely to have trouble affording broadband internet service is, quite larger than those that are eligible for ACP.
And also to kind of highlight the fact that, as Jennifer's saying, I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve. I mean, we've been working with these other jurisdictions around us, kind of offering the approach of what we've learned. I mean, we've had the opportunity to dig into it a much deeper level, but they can now follow kind of the path of what we've done. These are the things that you should consider and you should look at. And we're working together kind of from a state perspective of how do we find where our challenges are the same, and how do we make sure that we're utilizing going after potentially state funding at some point that benefits us regionally.
Jackie, you got your hand up?
Yes. The question really is a little bit of a follow-on to that, and that is, how did you account for, or did you look at the current subsidy level, ACP, and count that as a factor in what you were doing? And did you look at tiers of subsidy? For example, assuming ACP would be part of the solution, but there then might be another tier above that that would be an Arlington tier. That's one question. So I'm trying to understand, when you looked at subsidies, what assumptions you made about what was currently available and whether that was part of this and you were going beyond it. And then the second thing is some of the information about subsidies made the assumption that it would be Arlington and direct Arlington subsidies. Did you look at having the subsidies be through the third parties so that the management of validation of whether people met the subsidies and whatnot was not an Arlington issue, but might, say, be part of the third party providers? I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's the question I have.
Andy, did you get your mic addressed? If not, I can take a stab at it.
Hopefully, I'll let me know if it's not right. But I will say we did take that into account when organizing the households for the subsidy model. Like Jen mentioned, there was the kind of the 30% threshold where a lot of households are eligible for the ACP. federal subsidy. And then below that, there's another subsidy called a Lifeline, which is also available and offers an additional of almost $10 a month off of the internet service. So for households that were eligible for that, we were able to also apply that that $10 additional benefit onto the internet service costs. And that's kind of maybe the one kind of, we had to make the assumption that the internet service costs would remain at kind of an assumed level for across the board, and then apply the subsidy benefits as they were eligible for. So for instance, we weren't able to account for a household's ability to receive, discounts for a service plan or look for another service provider. As was mentioned in the report, we exclusively use the Xfinity price points.
So I'm not sure I understand. Did you assume the base level of subsidies, federal and Lifeline, and then talk about the gap between that and affordability? Or did you assume no subsidies and talk about the full gap? Because what I would like to know is if we assume that everyone who is eligible, because we know we have not been getting people who are eligible to get those subsidies.
Right.
So if we knew that if our goal was to get everyone who was eligible to get those subsidies, then what would the gap be? And is that a type of subsidy that then could be administered based on eligibility for the others? So it might not even require an additional management system to find out eligibility. Just, eligibility could be verified just once. And then you would have basically tiered subsidies.
Sure, I think that's the way this was undertaken, is to either assume full subsidy uptake or none, when in reality it's about closer to 25 or 30%. I can let Jen speak to maybe more of the assumptions in the overall model that were made and kind of addressing that, but that's how we accounted for available subsidy in this.
So you didn't look at, so I just want to be clear, you did not look at the assumption of what if everyone who was eligible had the currently available subsidies?
No, excuse me, I can jump in. Yes, what you're looking at, so the first row, 100 with full federal subsidy uptake, that's assuming that everyone who is eligible for the ACP program, and actually also the Lifeline program, because you can get both actually. So they accounted for both of them, but everyone who is eligible for those programs are taking advantage of it and receiving the full benefit. And so what this number is showing, the $3.8 million, is really, it's assuming that those who are getting ACP are essentially zeroing out their internet costs. And so they're not contributing to this $3.8 million. This is everyone else between that 30 and 50% of the area median income. And so the next, and I mean, we do know the percentage of folks who are taking advantage of ACP. It's, I think, currently like 22% of those who can qualify are actually taking advantage. But we wanted to just show, I mean, again, this is just really like high level here. So we walked through a lot of different options just in this. And so we wanted to stop here just to give a general ballpark sense of like the various costs. So realistically, it's probably somewhere in between the 9 million and the 3.8 million for subsidizing that level of service. So the second row, 100 and no federal subsidy uptake, that's where you're subsidizing at that level, 100, but no one is taking advantage of ACP. And so obviously that's not totally accurate, because we know at least 22% are taking advantage. But again, it just gives you a sense. And also it kind of gives you a sense too, there's who knows what will happen with the ACP. It could go away. And so this also gives us a sense of, if that does go away, this is the impact to us too. Your question about offloading, did we consider offloading anything to like third-party nonprofit groups? And the answer is no, not in this. I mean, there's definitely been discussions, and that's an option if this is something that the county, wishes to pursue. But that was not included in this model evaluation. And actually what you're seeing here, it's just the subsidy of the service. So this doesn't include any, because there is so many variables associated with implementation of a program and what that might look like. That was not those numbers, those financials weren't included here. And that would actually be rather, complicated and adds significant risk and cost to sort of this model. But these numbers here are just really the service. So it's like, even if we offloaded the management of this to a third party, these would still reflect sort of the service subsidy costs. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so I believe you're saying if we got everyone to have full uptake on the current subsidies, and they are maintained, I understand, that the subsidy cost would be of the remaining would be about 4 million a year.
Yeah, to subsidize at that 100 level.
At the 100 level, and there's
Yeah.
some question of whether that is a needed level or not, but
Yeah.
It's certainly that or the 1.5 million is certainly, there's a big, I mean, one is twice the other, so those are some, to me, those are option A and option B. And then, as in the first report, the issue of how much do you basically get back by investing in the outreach that it takes to get full uptake. Because that's the other piece of it, is as you said, that's one where we may not have done as well as other counties. But if we were to focus on this, one of the ways to look at it would be, what our cost recovery is of getting full uptake.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And that is going to be an added cost. I think it's mentioned in there as a risk and an added cost, but but that was not included in this financial analysis. But you're absolutely right.
Think about that. Yeah, we should think about that as a piece of this, because these options have the make the investment to get the full uptake is like a part one, and what your costs, and then decision of which level of service you want to get the full uptake for. Whether it's option A or option C on this. And if you end up doing option C, you start to really change the dollars over time.
I think it's also important to remember they're laying all of this out, and part of this is where, I think it was mentioned earlier, our policy and kind of framework decisions. What do we want as a county, right? And this is where kind of some of the questions that you're asking, Jackie. It's like thinking about, all right, we could do this, but this is what it's going to cost. Or we could say that maybe there's a smaller scale, what we have the ability financially to do, but this is ultimately our goal of where we want to get to. And so I think what this is doing is kind of laying out a lot of the different options for us to then have the discussion. Okay, this is what this would mean. What do we want to give up for doing something like this?
Well, and one more thought, and that is, you provided two levels, 100, 100, and 120, and these are the kinds of things that change pretty rapidly in terms of what the expectation and the need is. So in some ways, calculating the cost of full uptake and focusing on that is even more important than what the level is, because that is going to change over time.
And as Kevin had posted about the internet, it's constantly moving, right? I mean, so it's hard because it's always going to be, we're always going to be upgrading and getting faster speeds happening. And so trying to incorporate that.
Well, and everyone's going to keep making school applications that require, greater bandwidth. So faster. Everybody wants, I mean, they're going to start doing interactive graphics that take all kinds of stuff. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I got two more kind of strategic questions I'm trying to wrap my head around. And I think I've got the answer to the first one, but I want to make sure that I'm sure. We talked about the revenue side of the equation. On the cost side of the equation, it looks like the analysis applied an assumption that there would be essentially the same infrastructure cost per passing for the three different models, three different infrastructure models, the wireless service authority, the third party operator, and the ISP. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we looked at the aggregate total number of passings, looked at the household density per square mile, and we applied that cost per passing across all three categories.
So the assumption is that that the Connect Arlington asset would not provide any kind of cost advantage to the wireless services authority comparative to the third party operator or the ISP models.
So Connect Arlington, because there was no design performed, there was no way of telling exactly how Connect Arlington could be integrated. But we did assume that Connect Arlington would be used as kind of a middle mile ring for the new networks and the cost associated with that from Connect Arlington. So we didn't assume that those were free services. We assumed that the new entity would pay Connect Arlington for those resources.
And do you think that's a reasonable simplifying assumption or a limitation of the level of granularity of the analysis, not being able to really look at where the infrastructure was relative to the potential customers?
It's the most reasonable that we could think of. Now, what exactly would the design have been? Where exactly are all these cost burden households? There's just no way of knowing. I mean, so when you look at the order of magnitude, the cost burden was, 5 times that of the competition. So it's many, many more. Where are they? Are they all, it's not just the affordable. We know where the affordable housing locations are, but we don't know where all the other cost burden and households are.
Sure. So the way of knowing would be to do a more detailed design, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and part of that would be knowing exactly where all of these cost burden households are.
Sure. And then the third strategic kind of question I have is, maybe I'm missing it because I'm scanning through it relatively quickly, but was there any analysis on the market impact of the various models? One thing is the impact to the cost burden households and their access, but the non-cost burden households would, I'm sure, like to pay less for their data as well. And cost of living is the biggest problem, the biggest economic problem in Arlington. But I'm not seeing any kind of market impact to the overall cost and availability and competition. Maybe I'm missing it, but is that in this analysis?
Well, I mean, we're factoring in the market itself by a variable take rate depending upon the number of competitors in each segment.
Sorry,
but
more specifically, what would the impact on the general pricing available from other competitors be of these various different models?
I mean, it's probably going to get more. They're probably going to get more aggressive, right? So they all have nationwide pricing, but they have discounts, and if they need to compete on price, they have other mechanisms to compete on price. And so the reality is that, even though we assumed, I think we said this in the report, that we assumed revenue that's based upon the average revenue per unit nationwide, the revenue might have to be substantially lower because of the level of competition, especially in like the cost burden locations where there's already, 2 providers, so outside of the underserved, outside of the non-competitive, everything else has at least 2, and then sometimes 3 competitors at 100/20. maybe even 4. So you have Starry, T-Mobile, Comcast, and Verizon all offering service over 100/20. It's a very competitive marketplace that you have in Arlington.
Okay, now those are all my questions.
Okay, I have a question and actually one observation. It's widely anticipated that with that new funding, the ACP funding will run out in April of 2024. There have been congressional hearings as far as possibly providing additional funding, and one of the questions that came up of the FCC is, were subsidized households basically already had, I think the intention was to provide, of ACP was to provide service to those who couldn't afford a service at all, but it looks like a lot of the people that are receiving ACP subsidies had already had service, and this was basically shifting from one tier of service to another. They obviously had to meet the eligibility criteria, but it's something that Congress is looking at right now. So, and asking the FCC to provide additional information on. I'm not sure it's information that's easily findable, but hey, question I had for our the consultants at Televate are you aware of any markets where a new ISP has entered a market with two strong wireline ISP providers and incumbents, and now we have obviously the 5G fixed wireless access competition from T-Mobile and Verizon in addition coming in. Are you aware of any markets where that's happening? I'm aware that Alexandria now has Ting coming in, and I believe they're going to provide service to the whole county.
I'm personally not aware of any. I mean, so there are providers that will overbuild cable with fiber, because they think they have a differentiator. But I mean, we talked with some providers about their interest in coming into the Arlington marketplace, and they said no, because there was already 2 strong competitors and an existing fiber provider. So I'm not aware of one. I mean, so Kevin Broadhurst might be aware of one where there's that level of competition.
I mean, Frank, yeah, Ting is entering the Alexandria market, but they didn't have a Fios competitor there too. Fios elected not to build there. It looks like now they're starting to expand in some kind of small pockets of the city, but not on a widespread. They do a fixed wireless as well. In most of our markets, we see a lot of two providers, Comcast and Verizon, in this area at least. But there are certainly some areas that have other, a third ISP there as well, in more far off places, I guess you could say. But yeah, there are circumstances where there's 3 companies.
Go back to we only had 5,000 places that didn't have competition, and competition of more than 2.
2 or more.
2 or more. Thank you. Yeah.
If I recall correctly, that's residential households, right? There wasn't a thorough survey of the commercial space.
No, is everything. That's why in the one slide we call them units and not households, because some of them are businesses. And it was really Verizon that, was not serving most of, was Comcast is serving almost all of them. I mean, the very few that are unserved are really unserved because both parties are not providing service there. But Comcast serves a huge percentage. I forget what it was, 99% of all locations in Arlington, and it's wherever there's a lack of competition, it's generally because Verizon is not serving that location.
Are there any other questions? If not, I want to thank
So
okay.
There's a question from Ms. Snelling. Since you're now discussing identified cost burden locations, the distinction between households and physical locations should be clear. I think you may be talking about households, not locations. So in that particular,
yes, the term has been being kind of used interchangeably. And so I thought I knew what you were saying, and then you changed it and I got confused. So I thought when you were talking about locations, you were talking about physical locations, not who lived in that location at the time. But then when you started about trying to identify locations that were cost burdened, that then becomes who lives there, not whether the location has access to it.
well,
So,
precisely.
Could you
And
clarify?
Well, so we, because we have access to this FCC data, we can identify exactly where the locations are that are underserved or unserved, and exactly where the locations are that lack competition. But the only information we have about the where regarding the cost burden is those affordable housing units. And those are a small fraction of this total population. I forget the number, Jennifer. Do you know the total number of affordable housing units in Arlington?
There's around 11,000.
So that's less than half.
That's not counting people. Yes, but it's not counting people who are at below the 30% or the 50% median who don't live in affordable housing, who live in, garden apartments that are market rate affordable or whatever. But could you make sure that wherever that your report clearly identifies which you're talking about in different locations? Because I do feel like you switched back and forth in talking, or maybe I didn't recognize what you were, because
I think
obviously
so. I'll just chime in because we had to wrap our heads around all of this too, and what do we call this and how we frame everything. And so I think in the report, it's pretty well flagged as to whether it's a location or we're talking about household or unit and what the difference between the three are. But your point, I'm just remembering like when we first started this process and how we would always have to go through this with them. But I think because of that, I think it is well spelled out in the report.
So are you not trying to identify places where there are households that don't have access or need subsidies versus locations that I'm confused. I'm now confused
I think what the difference is that we know the places, the locations where there's no service, because Joe mentioned there's the FCC data, and that gives us the buildings and the locations. But the thing about this analysis is that we not only wanted to look at the physical quality of the service and whether we were getting what we want and whether there's service at a specific location, but is that service affordable? And so when you're talking about affordability, now you got to bring in a household, because you're talking about, because units don't have income, households have income. But the problem is that when you bring these households into the mix, we don't know where they live. And even in affordable housing where we throw out 30% AMI, 50% AMI, we actually don't know. It would be a very onerous exercise to understand where, like what income is associated with a certain unit. We know the income restrictions, but we actually don't know like who actually lives there. And so what this is showing is that this is beyond just affordable housing locations. There's folks that earn 50% AMI and they don't live in affordable housing. And so we you could sort of make some assumptions around affordable housing, given there's income restrictions there. But if you want to be inclusive, that's what we tried to do with this analysis. We don't know where those people are. And I think because Joe was kind of talking about that, And so I feel like maybe that was kind of the confusing part of it, but that's why households kind of brought into the mix.
But without knowing where they live, the census does tell you how many households we have below a certain income.
Yeah,
And
we know
so
that.
you can pick any income level and you could and make the assumption that you're making about locations. You could make countywide and say we have X percent of our population that is, below this level that we're talking about for subsidies. And then you don't know exactly how they're distributed across the county, but that's a different issue.
That is what we did, and that was why, going back to Joe's question, or the question to Joe, like where everybody's located and getting the detail of the infrastructure, we don't know exactly where these people are, but we know they count with generally the count.
That's why we used a model that just factors density and not specific location.
Because that was considered.
And I think the whole purpose of this analysis was to kind of get a gut check. I mean, there's a bunch of different options that we could do. They're all kind of different. And we needed to hone our focus. And so, sure, we could have done a much more detailed engineering analysis and paid for that. But our thinking was, and Joe and his team have all the capability of doing that analysis. But our thinking was, let's stay a bit high level here and kind of so that we can hone our focus a bit better. And so if at the end of the day, we want to do, given all the analysis that we've done, but yet we still really want to do the wireless service authority model, that's just what we want to do. Well, okay, well then there's a next step analysis that needs to be done after this. And that might entail more detailed analysis of identifying or making some more detailed assumptions about where households live so that we can, we can factor that in. But for the purpose of this analysis, it was designed to be a bit more high level so that we can, do exactly what we're doing here, is just really discuss the issues and kind of get a gut check of which way we should be pointing ourselves.
I guess I have to go back and look at the methodology, because then when the gentleman says we just looked at density, that throws in another term where I have no idea what you're talking about. I know what density is, but I don't know what your density is. So I'll go back and see if this is in the more detailed report. But all I'm saying is the discussion gets confusing pretty fast when we're talking about slides and a verbal report, I guess, when it's not easily laid out what that methodology is. And maybe a methodology slide on that would be very helpful in briefing to other audiences. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Otherwise, I don't see any hands up, so I think I want to thank everybody who participated in this. That was very helpful. I think we've got just a couple more items left in our agenda, so we want to try to wrap them up here. But thank you very much, and we look forward to the strategic recommendations coming, I guess, probably first quarter of 2024.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we'll want to weigh in, look at that very closely and weigh in.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. That's a lot of information. Hey, that brings us to item number 5, PEG channel Comcast Verizon franchise renewals update. Richard, I think, are you going to take that?
Yeah, I can give a quick update. We're continuing to complete the needs assessment process. And the draft report is supposed to be delivered in the first quarter of next year. We have extended Verizon again. I can't remember if that was before our last meeting with you or not. I'm sorry, Comcast.
Yeah.
We have extended again for another year. And our plan is to finish the needs assessment, possibly look at some of the other documents that are produced even through the process you were discussing this evening, and then begin our negotiations in earnest.
The Comcast now extended through the
December
end of 2024?
24, yes.
December 2020, and Verizon through June of 2024, or?
Correct.
Okay. All right, and I guess not sure. Will there be further? I think the hearing reheld last year, will that satisfy the need at this point as far or what?
At this point, yes. We don't need to have another public hearing, but you are welcome to comment on the report once we receive the draft.
Okay, you'll make sure we get a copy of that when it's available.
Yes.
All right, good. And I guess on the PEG channels, obviously, I guess the county has a role in as far as providing the fee. That's I think limited to capital improvements, right?
Yes, the cable companies remit to us $1.38 per subscriber per month in funds that are restricted to capital uses for public educational or government television. And the three entities in Arlington that comprise that, public is currently AIM, or Arlington Independent Media, educational is schools, and government is the county.
Right. And they've been, I think, being provided they've been provided the funds as in the past. I know. We saw that article. I circulated the article about AIM, leaving the Wilson Boulevard location. Is there anything you can provide? I know that rent obviously can't be that's been a long going thing. That the rent can't be paid out of those PEG channel fees, right? So
it cannot.
Right. So it's only new capital improvements, I think.
Correct.
Do we have any further word on the indication in the article was AIM was looking at space in Courthouse Plaza? Do you have any more information on that?
I do not. I know that they do have space in another county-owned building at 4700 South 4 Mile Run, and are hosting some of their services at that building, but I do not have any updates on a ratified lease or agreement at the courthouse location.
All right. Well, if you hear anything, if you could let us know, that would be appreciated.
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions for Richard on the PEG channel or the Comcast Verizon franchise renewal? No, I don't see any, so we'll move on to legislative update. All right, let's see. At its December meeting, the FCC initiated a rulemaking looking toward possible prohibition of early termination fees, ETFs, and billing cycle fees by cable TV providers, which is in harmony with the Biden administration's fight against junk fees. Recent survey finds that 92% of U.S. households get an internet service at home, which is up from 83% in 2018. So it's a substantial increase in just that 5-year period. And 98% of that 92% are subscribing to broadband level speed services. So again, and also a big increase over the prior years. So that is very encouraging news. Small cable systems in both Kentucky and Alaska are shutting down their multi-channel or traditional cable video services due to escalating programming costs and continued cord cutting by customers. This is a trend that seems to be picking up. These are real small systems, but it's just something that we ought to pay attention to. Verizon has announced the launch of Fios TV Plus to all new customers who subscribe to Fios video services, which will enable live TV and streaming services through one small device without a traditional set-top box. That's all I've got. Let's see, any further DTS update, Richard?
I do not have anything else.
All right, that brings us to the good of the order. Anybody got anything? Oh, Gary, I think you may have come up. I had asked earlier, you're going to circulate the minutes, November minutes, I guess in time for the next meeting. Gary? Good. All right. All right, roll on.
That looks like a thumbs up. You're a little choppy. You're a little choppy, Gary.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. I think, do we need to, for a all virtual meeting, do we need to reflect where we're participating from? Richard, do you know?
Can you repeat that? I'm hearing.
If we're doing, I know when we're doing a hybrid meeting, virtual participants are supposed to identify where they're participating from. But do we need to do that for an all virtual meeting?
You might, just to be safe, just do a roll call.
All right. I'm participating from home in Arlington, Virginia. John?
John Burke, participating from home in Arlington, Virginia.
All right. Jackie?
Home in Arlington, Virginia.
All right. Gary? Roll. Okay. All right, Mike?
Home, Arlington, Virginia.
All right. Laura?
I am home in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay. Andrea?
I am home in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay. Miranda?
Also home in Arlington, Virginia.
And Prescott?
I'm actually in Huntsville, Alabama for the holidays. So.
Okay. All right. I think, Jim, did I?
Arlington, Virginia is my home.
All right. Very good. I think we got everybody. I believe Gary is at home. I recognize the wallpaper there.
I second that motion, Frank.
All right. Any other items for good of the order?
Voting closes on our preferred order, priority order for the Meet the Author event by Friday evening, so we can get it back to the libraries. The target for that is our September meeting of next year, kind of do your summer reading list and back to school. But so hopefully we'll know confirmed book and author in the spring, and that means that everyone has to go do their reading.
Right.
And then expect budget in January. Budget's coming. It comes fast and furious. We don't have a lot of time, so keep your eye out for any of the postings that come out from the county manager on the budget proposal, so that we can get through it. And Richard, Noren, obviously, we'd love a briefing on the budget whenever it's available.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other items? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Never mind.
Do I have such a motion?
Before we adjourn, Lauren, can you share your last name for the minutes, please?
Yes, sure. I just saw that. This is Lauren Hall, and hi, Frank. I know you from some other stuff, but I just am a member of the public and just wanted to pop in and listen in, and that was all. So last name is Hall, Hall.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hello, Lauren.
You're very welcome. Hey, Frank.
I move to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Any noes? No. Any abstentions? No. Looks like we are adjourned. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and see you in 2024.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good holiday.